Was having a chat this week with somebody. I like to quip, saying that I'm neither left wing nor right wing. I'm the middle finger. And the gentleman responded by saying, "But labels do matter. You know, you can't erase language." And I found that quite interesting because, to a degree, he's got a point. Like a gardener is somebody who's a gardener, and it's his descriptor or a doctor. But if you're talking about something abstract, like an ideological worldview, then labels become less important.
No, I think labels become really problematic. I think they're very important because they're so problematic. We like to compartmentalize people. We like to compartmentalize things. But the problem is if you decide for yourself that you're left wing or right wing, then you've automatically got to believe certain things. I mean, I'm quite proud of the fact that we've been equally accused of being right wing and left wing and so on, because this shouldn't be how the world works. That okay, I'm right wing, therefore I've got to support Israel, or I'm right wing, therefore I've got to be anti this or that. That's not how it works. We should be looking at each issue as it is, and having a conversation about each issue, and set this ideological nonsense aside.
Well, I think it's up to us really as to whether they do create division. I mean, I think it's a related issue, but okay, let's take the obvious right or left wing. Why aren't we grown up enough to just consider that somebody who describes themselves as either right wing if you're left wing, or left wing and you're right wing, that they just have a different point of view? Ultimately, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before. You would label yourself as such because you believe that you're pursuing ultimately probably the same ends, but just by different means. And I think division is or the sowing of division, the way that division manifests, is slightly a separate issue, but of course, absolutely related. I think also one of the massive problems with labeling, whether it's of people or of things or of concepts or whatever, is it means different things to different people, and that is in some ways deliberate. But I think I think that adds to the confusion.
The term left and right wing, I mean, I think most people should know by now that they come from the French Revolution, which was a few centuries ago. They had a reason to exist then because it was literal division of the parliamentary structure. You know, those who were trying to revolutionize the system sat to the left of the parliamentary speaker, and those who wanted to preserve the monarchy sat to the right. The terms now don't mean anything, and I have asked numerous people over the years, will you call me far right? This is now even better. Please define that. What do you mean by that? And every single person you ask has a different definition.
And I would say that all the definitions are wrong anyway, because if we look at the so-called political spectrum and we look at the absolute extremes of that, and we look at extreme socialism / communism on one side and extreme right wing / national socialism on the other side, what is the difference between them? So the better paradigm perhaps might be a circle, that once you move too far to the right, you basically end up in the same place as moving too far to the left. But at the end of the day, as I say, these as you've said, these labels are there to divide, and who's who. I think the question that we've all got to ask, no matter what part of the political spectrum we might think we exist in, the question we've got to ask is, who is it that wants that division? And that seems to me to be the best starting place, and perhaps then you discover that person that you're hollering at, who you say is on the opposite side of the political spectrum to yourself, actually is wanting to consider exactly the same issues that you're wanting to consider, and in fact, the enemy isn't on that political spectrum at all.
Yes. Well, that was the point I was making. I said, so I was at a gathering of cartoonists a few days ago, some of South Africa's top cartoonists. And the irony is that they all were impressed that I pitched up, because they said, well, that was very brave, because, you're the only right-wing cartoonist. And I found that so odd, because I said to them, what do you mean, though? Like, what does that actually mean? We both want a better society. We both want a better world, right? We just have perhaps different views on certain things, and they still stuck in that sort of ideological paradigm, and it's bizarre.
Well, I don't think it's that bizarre when you consider the amount of effort that goes into maintaining that particular status quo, because exactly like Mike says, if people are busy fighting with each other and only ever looking sideways and not up, sort of figuratively, then that's ideal. That is absolutely ideal. So yeah, I mean, inserting of labeling is I would have said, when it is done deliberately, it is for that very reason, and I totally agree. On the sort of continuum thing, I can remember one of the few things I remember from school that seemed to absolutely make sense. Looking at whether one was told it was extreme left or right, ultimately it is exactly the same thing, and certainly for the people within such a system that describes itself as one or the other, the outcomes are more or less identical. And I think we're seeing in a lot of so-called sort of Western civilized societies, we're seeing those points being reached, if not for everybody, certainly sort of in principle, the push, the drive for those spaces, those points on that continuum is absolutely playing out now, I think.
I think the major issue here is that from bottom to top, we have this political division of, doesn't matter what country you're in either, you've got two major parties or two major ideologies at work here. But if we look, just taking two examples, the creation of the Soviet Union and the creation of Nazi Germany, and you find the same, when you actually do a little bit of digging, you find the same financial interests supporting both efforts. And so, that's okay, that's an extreme example. But this is how it works. We've got the same financial interests supporting both so-called sides of politics in all our countries. And so we end up with a false choice between, in the UK, between Labour and Tory, and increasingly it's a false choice, because increasingly it's obvious that it's a uni-party because they pursue the same policies. And so, the question that we've got to, I think if we've got to persuade anybody of anything, it is to look a bit deeper at who is actually who is supporting and originating these ideologies in the first place.
The one gentleman was chatting to me about, it doesn't really matter too much, but it was about hunting. And he said, but I completely oppose it. It's predictable that you would support hunting. And I said, how is that a political thing? Okay. I asked him, do you eat meat? He said, yes. And then there was a moment of silence, and he goes, yes, I understand that what you're about to say is that it's going to be a double standard here. But somehow this has been encapsulated into political ideology and, of course, division.
Of course it has, because it's a mechanism of control. And so the fact is that we can't have those conversations because, let's put ourselves in the shoes of that person you were speaking to. We can't have that conversation because he's already, without thinking about it, and this is the key point, without thinking about it, he has already decided that he is against hunting and he's pro-abortion because he happens to exist in that particular political space. The main issue is that once you find yourself in that kind of reality and that kind of thinking, you're immediately switching off your brain at that point. You don't need to think anymore, and this is part of the attraction of it. Of course, you can just consume a whole swathe of policy areas and say, yeah, I support that, and you don't actually have to consider any of the implications. You just get on with it. So that's part of the problem. The problem is that for most people, they don't play in the game. They're non-playing characters, to use that so-called right-wing term, and they don't think. We got to start thinking.
Just as well for the people who do get stuck in these conversations, because otherwise you have to confront the rather unfortunate reality that if you say that you oppose hunting and therefore you don't want to see animals being killed, but you support abortion and therefore you do want to see unborn fetuses being killed, then that puts you in a slightly tricky position. But of course, that's not part of it. You're not supposed to think that much about it.
Because you've outsourced your critical thinking.
Yeah, totally and utterly. But it's it's brilliantly done, and also you see how the sort of the drawbridges drop at the appropriate moments when people, it's slightly different, but how when people are primed for such and such a thing, and the example now, I think we might have talked about this before, but the Labour government via what has been referred to as a think tank, but is in effect the Labour government, has said that they've just cracked it. You know, they've worked out how to stop this terrible scourge of illegal or the problems with legal migration, which is via digital ID. And the way that the ground is prepared for it means that people of all creeds, as it were, politically, should fall. It's sort of the trap is designed for everybody to fall into. And that again is another gift of the sort of labeling thing, because you can in effect sell the same product to different people by just calling it a different thing. It's wonderful. I mean, it never finishes.
But I think a great counter response to the whole "Are you a left winger or are you a right winger?" Might be something along the lines of, "Well, if you can give me a definition of the term, then I'll tell you if I am."
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that should completely be the first response with any of these things. Yeah, exactly so. To define, well, rather than saying "am I whatever," say, well, what is it exactly that you think you mean by that? And then you do. I mean, frankly, that should actually, if people are open-minded enough and sort of can remain calm enough, that does lead into an interesting discussion. Because I mean, after all, what we're talking about now is not. I can't see that anyone would find this offensive, whether they consider themselves to be of the left or of the right. Just to examine what that does mean and why they think that such and such a thing conforms to it. And it reminds me actually of the conversation that you had with Vanessa Beeley I can't remember what it was, a couple of days ago. And she was talking about the differences, the imagined differences between, say, Donald Trump and Joe Biden with regard to war, or indeed Obama, or any of them. And it is incredible that there are an enormous number of people who will believe that because somebody has been sort of labelled as a peacemaking anti-war president, that therefore there won't be war, and they won't remember that there was war. And then you look at what has happened, and you see that the way in which this person is described and their administration is described is totally at odds with what actually happened. But people will continue to believe it because that's the packaging that the story has had.
You mentioned emotional response. Why do you think people get so worked up?
Yeah, I mean that's a good one. That is quite some conditioning, because exactly why would you? Why do people feel? And again, Donald Trump is an interesting one. A lot of people do seem to behave sort of like they know him, and we get this on UK column after the news. Not that we don't at all make a practice of playing the man and not the ball, but sometimes it is very much the case that you can look at one individual who has, for whatever reason, influenced the situation in a way that deserves scrutiny. And this is not meant to be a generalization, but there are invariably a number of responses to such a sort of talking point, especially in the news, about something that's perceived as, say, critical of the person, or negative about that particular person. And it's really interesting because often it manifests, or the way it expresses itself is as though the UK column viewer who's sort of written in about it takes it personally, as though somehow you're, savaging a member of their family, or even them by extension. And it is interesting, but I think this is one of the things that has been done very successfully, is perhaps through all these incredible and non-stop forms of media, people's personalities have sort of been imprinted upon those that are absorbing the content, and therefore they do seem to have what they perceive to be almost a personal relationship with that person.
I think there's a number of issues here. The first is to follow on from what Charles is saying. Because there's so much chaos and so on at the moment, there's definitely a need in people for some kind of hero to come and save the day. There's no question about that. But on the more general point, there seems to be some kind of ingrained fundamental requirement in humanity to be a member of a club. It doesn't matter whether it's support for a sports club. You think of how motivated people get about football, for example, and how partisan they are. So it doesn't matter whether it's sports or whether it's politics or whatever it happens with, whether it's gender or whatever it happens to be. People want to belong to a club, and this is why it makes us so manipulable, because we have that strong desire to be amongst people that think the same way and behave the same way and so on. And this makes us suckers for this every single time. The people that are sort of managing societies recognize how to manage societies, and giving strong brand identity to the various clubs is a mechanism for doing that. And we fall for it every time.
It's the Messiah syndrome.
No question about that, but also it's because people perceive events locally, nationally, globally, whatever it happens to be. They perceive events as being so big that there's nothing that they as individuals can do about it, because they're just little people. And we it's natural for us to all have this kind of concern and so on, but somehow, because Trump has given the perhaps false perception that he's somehow something special because he happens to own some real estate and a couple of golf courses, and has said some things in the past that people agree with, and nobody seems to. People seem to switch their brains off at this point and say, "Well, okay, he said stuff that I agree with in the past, so I'm going to support this guy because he's going to save the day, and he said he's going to drain the swamp, and he's going to do this, that, and the other thing." Nobody has ever considered the possibility that he has lied all this time. I mean, I'm not saying that he has, but because I don't know the man and I don't know, what his thought processes have been over the years. But nobody has considered the possibility that he has lied his way into the position of President of the United States, and that actually the faith in that individual or any individual is falsely placed. And this is dangerous, because we're effectively giving up any agency that we have. But the fundamental problem here is that people refuse to believe that they have any agency of their own.
I think it was Catherine Fitz who made a great comment about a way to look at world leaders. That they're effectively just middle management.
I think that's a good observation, but I think that this is another aspect of the problem that people have. Is that they're always thinking about who's at the top of the pyramid, and that's the target. Well, no, that's not the target. That should never be the target, because the fact of the matter is the people at the top of the pyramid, they hold the purse strings and so on, but they have no direct control over what happens on the ground. And so they need this layer of middle management. If you can disrupt that layer of middle management, you can disrupt their plans. And that I think is where people make a mistake. They're always trying to target the top of the pyramid. They're always worried about who's at the top of the pyramid. Who cares? Doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, those people are invisible, but the people that are visible, the people that are in middle management, they are there. They're the target, and that's who we should be targeting, in my opinion.
We should also, I think there should be much more lampooning. I mean, the idea of a one world government is just so utterly preposterous. that it's laughable, frankly. And yes, all right, there are many well-founded concerns that come with the idea of it and the sort of movement towards it, but it does come down to the choices that you make and what you're able to put in place to make sure that you can deal with a situation as it presents itself, I think.
Ian Davis actually makes a good point about that one world government narrative. I mean, I agree with you. I think it does seem quite preposterous. The world's a very big place. But he argues that one world governance is more plausible. And one world governance, for example, can occur through systems like the UN, which has, almost 200 countries basically agreeing to everything that the UN says.
I'll just gently make the point, Jerm, that we've had a one world governance series on the UK Column website since 2010 or so, or 2011. So this has been our point from the beginning. This isn't about one world government, because of course that is simply not possible. Even if you have some kind of Politburo in the UN or whatever organization is supposed to be at the top of that particular pyramid. Of course, there has to be government at various strata and in various parts of the world, various regional assemblies and so on. But it's the governance framework which is the important thing. And of course, we would categorize digital ID and CBDC and these types of policy areas as being part of that governance framework. And it's the idea that that is decided in one location on the planet, and that therefore at a local level we basically have no say in how that framework is created and what that framework is. That I think is a dangerous thing, and this comes back to a whole other raft of issues. For example, the issue of diversity, which is presented as being some mechanism to protect minorities or make sure that people that are immigrants to a country are treated fairly, or that women are treated fairly, or whatever it happens to be. But in fact, I think we may have mentioned this before, but diversity is about breaking down the differences between peoples and between whatever section of society we're talking about, and that in the process of doing that, you actually break down the strength of the human. Because strength comes from having different ideas and debating and so on, and we end up with better answers when we actually approach problems from different points of view. If we all think the same, and then we're weakening ourselves as a species, and that's dangerous. But it absolutely, governance is the governance frameworks are the things that we should be focusing on, not the idea of some kind of single government, which can never exist, as Charles is saying.
The three of us are quite diverse. We have different views and we have overlapping views. That in itself is diversity. We aren't all zombies with precisely the same outlook on everything.
Yeah, well, that's because again, these are points of division that certain people take advantage of for at multiple levels. I mean, the people at the top of the pyramid absolutely take advantage of that as a mechanism of control, but equally, people at the bottom of the pyramid take advantage of that just because it gives them some kind of public persona or whatever, and they stand and they shout at certain sections of the town or city that they happen to be in, and start shouting about enemy combatants and this kind of thing. So this is something that can be exploited in many, many ways. Now, I'm not going to say that I like everybody. I reserve the right to dislike anybody I like, but I'm sorry, dislike anybody I want rather than yes. But I'm going to do that. I personally would make that decision based on what they say and what they do, but particularly what they do, not based on anything else. I mean, at the end of the day, why would I care what religion somebody is? I mean, I grew up in a society that told me that I had to care what religion somebody was, and that that was nonsense, and that was obviously nonsense for anybody that had a brain at the time.
And I mean, too much diversity in any event is not a good thing. South Africa on a macro level is a good example of that. But on a more micro level, if you're on a tour bus and there are, let's say, 30 people from different countries and they're all speaking different languages, you're going to really get nowhere until you hear that one person speaking perhaps English and you go, there's somebody, and you want to go and sit next to them so you can at least chat.
No, I don't think I agree with that. I think if how many countries do we have in the world? 170 something or whatever it is. Each of those countries, some of them have formed naturally. Some of them have formed because various empires have said this is your border. But nonetheless, those people have different languages often. But I think we made this point as well before. There are concepts expressed in some languages which are unexpressible in other languages. If we destroy those in the name of diversity, we say, no, you can't speak your language anymore because I can't understand you. You've got to speak English, or you've got to speak German, or you've got to speak French. Then, of course, you lose the concepts that are expressed in that language by those people. You lose that thought process, and that's what I mean when we weaken ourselves when we do that. So I take your point that if you're a stranger in a strange land, it can be difficult because you don't speak the language. But that doesn't mean that we should be all deciding to sort of lessen the range of. Yeah,
that's not what I was saying. That's why I said on a micro
sorry about
level.
That.
That's why I said on a micro level. If you're on a tour bus, you're going to have a very, very boring time if you aren't able to communicate with everybody around you.
Yeah, okay, but I think we got to get our terms right here because when you say diversity, that doesn't mean the same as when they say diversity, because when they say diversity, what they mean is the removal of diversity. They mean that in order to be accepting of other cultures and so on, you've got to change your culture. And so the aim of the game there is to turn everybody into the same thing. It's an example of this. If you look at any city in the Western world, in Europe, let's just say Europe, you will find the same shops in the same high streets. Everything looks the same. Now, this at a certain level is a great example of it. And it's horrible because you can't go to Paris, or you can't go to Berlin, or you can't go to Wrocław or Warsaw and see something which is in Wrocław or Warsaw. You can't see something which is Polish anymore. You can't see something which is German in Berlin. It's all the big multinational corporates. This is the effect of their meaning of diversity.
With a capital D.
Yes. And it's destroying cultures, and that is the point of it. So because the language that's being used with a certain section of society has been turned into something different. So the words might be English, but they don't mean what you think they mean or what I think they mean, and that's our problem. So the first thing that we have to do is to try to interpret what they're saying, and it's a silly thing to say perhaps, but often, if you just assume that what they mean is 180 degrees out from what you think they mean, you may be getting closer to the truth.
Yeah, but that dovetails to the start of this conversation with understanding labels and definitions. So we need to also be clear with our language. So when people speak like this, we need to first ask them, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, that's where you can come off the rails quite quickly, because mostly people don't know. And that's unfortunately where I think this sort of conversation that starts out as well-meaning and well-intended can turn into something that becomes more contradictory and controversial than it should, because people are unable. I mean, it shouldn't be really regarded as a challenge, but people perceive it to be a challenge, as though you're immediately trying to undermine their point of view. But in actual fact, you're just trying to understand it. And like you say, going back to the beginning, the thing is that people by and large, they don't understand. They know that such and such a thing equals far right or far left, or I mean, actually, not really far left these days, mostly far right, and that's enough. That's all you need to know. You don't have to be able to qualify it. It's it's pathetic how disappointing to have to exist like that.
Charles, so as you know, I did a conversation with Vanessa Beeley a few nights ago, and I got a very, very angry message from somebody after that.
Oh, good.
This is just anti-Semitic. How can you even platform somebody like this? She doesn't know what she's talking about. Blah blah blah. I'm so disappointed in you and UK Colin. Blah blah blah. And this is the problem that you were alluding to earlier. That people get so emotionally attached to these ideological worldviews.
Yeah, I mean, on that specific issue, join the club. You know that happens without fail when there's any suggestion that that the state of Israel, which has nothing to do with Jewish people or the Jewish faith, we're literally just talking about the state of Israel. It is absolutely seen as somehow indistinct from criticism of Jewish people, and therefore it's the inference is that it's anti-Semitic. And I mean, and again, that term is completely misappropriated anyway. So yes, I mean it's very sad because people do get triggered by it, and they therefore don't think about what is actually being said. I'm not. I mean, I remember exactly Vanessa's remark, and I completely agree with her within the context that she said it, and saying that, because I mean, again, are people inconsistent? I mean, did whoever you were communicating with have a view on Kashmir or Western Sahara or any of the other many disputed territories over the world, and their how they sort of came to be? So yes, I think it's another excellent exercise in let's say labeling the fact that people, an enormous number of people that have never really stopped to think about it, and I'm not talking about people that are Jewish or have links to Israel, but people across the board are just conditioned into thinking of Israel as being the only country on earth that is somehow absolutely to be regarded as indistinct from anybody that is Jewish. It's a remarkable achievement to have been able to sow that mental condition across the world. But it's amazing because I mean, I don't know. Can you think of anywhere else that falls into a similar category?
The other point I would make about this is, of course, that reaction from that person to what Vanessa said was, first of all, a knee-jerk reaction. They reacted immediately without thinking, based on, I'm speculating here, but probably based on ideological lines. But they did so without considering who and what Vanessa Beeley actually is, and maybe don't know anything about her. And so, the fact that she lived in Gaza for a while, the fact that she's lived in Syria for so many years, the fact that she has been on the ground, on the receiving end of a lot of what Israel has done over the last number of decades, but also her family background as well, and the fact that she was the daughter of a British diplomat who ended up carrying the can for the Suez crisis and so on. And so she has quite a bit of direct knowledge of the situation that many of us don't have. Most of us are reading about Israel from books. She has lived actually quite a lot of that, and so has a different perspective on things. And so whether we agree with her or not, and this is the point that I really want to make here, whether we agree with someone or not, we should be prepared to consider what they have to say. And by that I mean whether we agree with them as an initial reaction or not, we should be willing to consider what they have to say and actually find out a little bit more about why they're saying it. that helps to inform our future decisions. But I've always said, Jeremy, that if we're finding ourselves in an ideological situation and somebody says something to us which causes that knot in our gut, and we just want to lash out and say something unpleasant about them, that's the point where we have to, in my opinion, actually challenge our own perceptions and our own, and we have to actually use that as a trigger for reconsidering whether our position is correct or not. And this is something that most of us don't do often enough or at all. We should be absolutely challenging our positions on things every day. Every time we make a statement or have a thought about it, am I right, or is there something I haven't taken into account here? Because that, if we aren't doing that, then we don't really believe in the truth at all.
Mike, I think you're absolutely perfectly right to talk about, a comment from Vanessa should be seen as something coming from somebody who has seen what she's seen, researched what she's researched, and all the other factors. But I think it's unfair on Vanessa to think that there's the possibility that her view is in any way an emotional one, or one that's based on stuff that she's seen, because I think that takes away what the objective point she was making, which was about just giving land that wasn't British to somebody. I mean, she was talking about the creation of the State of Israel, which is a completely extraordinary thing, and rather than giving people the possibility of regarding Vanessa as being a sort of Arabist sympathizer and having any sort of interference with in her view of all the various aspects of her life that you reference, I think is a real issue, and yet we see this sort of both ways, whether it be in relation to Israel or exactly like you say, Jerm, with the issue of whether Islam is or isn't compatible with such and such a thing. But I think it does, because what I would say with Israel is, of course, the conversation with Vanessa specifically was about Christian Zionism, and again, that means that people are not taking an objective view. They're basing their point of view on something that they believe is the case from sort of historical biblical context, and that strips away the objectivity. So in effect, it becomes an emotional point of view, which I think is a dangerous thing.
Asking the question actually is not a very good question, whether or not Israel has the right to exist, because a state exists or doesn't. Nobody can kind of enforce that right. What do you think?
I don't know whether it is. I don't know whether it is. I think because, just to follow on from what Charles just said, the word that Charles used there was extraordinary. It's the way that project was done hasn't been done that way before or since. So I think it is actually quite a good question. And it's one that needs to be discussed much more, not less, would be my suggestion on that.
Yeah, I agree.
But I mean,
I
who
think
gives it the right, though? Sorry.
Just to draw out because the inference, what does one infer from the question? And again, that's you have to ask yourself, well, what is it you're reading into that question? Because what you should mean, but sorry, not what you should, but what I think you mean by that question is was the way in which the State of Israel was created correct? What was that? Was that to follow a process that that was sort of fair, legal, lawful, or any of these sorts of things? But ultimately, was it right? as opposed to does that question mean that all Jews should be wiped off the face of the earth? Well, what a ridiculous thing to try. I mean, there are Jewish people outside the state of Israel, and there are non-Jewish people within. So it makes no sense on that basis, but you can bet that people will infer from that question that is what you mean by it, and indeed an answer that Vanessa gave in saying no, it shouldn't. That people will say, oh well, she's saying death to whoever. I mean, which is just completely not fair or not the case.
There was that band recently. Was it in the UK? Where they sang "Death to the IDF" or something, and they caused havoc. Yeah. I know, unbelievable. I mean, not unbelievable. They did it. Unbelievable that people can't think further than the end of their nose because. Did we not talk about it before? Anyway, but just imagine if they'd said if they'd sung "Death to Russian armed forces." Great, well done, guys. Well, same place next year. So yeah, it's just. It's pathetic. By the way, it's your country that pretty much created the state of Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why. But that is why. Going back to the specifics, then that's where it does come into play. The fact that Vanessa does know what she knows and has lived what she has, and that her father was a diplomat, during that sort of period. That's where all of this becomes significant, because we look at how history, as it's unfolding in front of our very eyes, is rewritten, and anyone, say teenagers now, will believe stuff that is absolute lies. From anything that's happened over the last couple of years. I mean, or look at where we are with climate change. The big one. People are absolutely conditioned into thinking something that is not true.
She did concede, saying, "Look, perhaps it's because she has an emotional attachment to Jewish history." And
no, I have much more time for people that approach these issues in that way than I do for people that have simply decided something because they actually have no historical attachment to the topic in any way, shape, or form. They've come to a certain conclusion because someone else told them that was the conclusion that they had to have. So someone like that, I think you can have a conversation with, but it's much harder to have a conversation with someone who has just taken a position without any kind of cerebral process at all, because there's no discussion. Patrick Henningsen and I were at a thing last night at Plymouth University, and it was a documentary film that was getting a showing. It hasn't been sold in the UK, so at this point nobody else can watch it unless there's another private viewing somewhere else in the country. But at this point, it can't be watched. And it's all about the militarization of the Arctic. And the premise is that this militarization is happening because of climate change, because the ice is melting, and therefore there's this massive race to get control of that neck of the woods. Now, there's a whole raft of issues around that particular topic. And I've completely lost the thread of where I was going to go with that. What were we talking about?
I'm enjoying your raft of issues in the Arctic, where of course there's no ice now, so it'd just be floating around with all your issues on it.
Right. Yeah. So we go in, we sit down, and the first person who speaks is a senior lecturer at Plymouth University who's a climate lecturer, and so there's no discussion with him whatsoever about anything. And then the guy who's made the documentary has been working in the past on David Attenborough's series and so on and whatnot. And it's absolutely clear that he has managed to get this documentary made by himself on his own with no support on the production side, but with massive support on the NATO side. And he has ended up producing something which is an absolute propaganda piece. But my point is, the whole premise of the thing has come from this ideological standpoint that hasn't really been thought through, and so. But it was the reaction from most of the audience, which was really amusing because none of them had thought through the issues either, and so they have been presented with this piece of work which they have consumed and there was no, in the Q&A at the end, there was clearly no thought process. I mean, for example, this is all part of this militarization of the Arctic is all happening because the ice is melting. And the bad guys in this are Russia and China. But China is spending more money now on building icebreakers than they ever have in the past. And I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. Why are they investing in icebreakers if the ice is melting? Right. So the whole argument is internal. Nobody in the room got this. Nobody in the room could understand this concept.
Aren't they just thinking ahead to 2030 when global emissions have dropped to below zero and all the ice comes back?
I couldn't comment on that. I mean, and Russia the same. They're building nuclear powered icebreakers. Right.
Yeah.
So why are they doing this if the ice is all melting? It's the lack of thought and consideration in that room for what they were being presented with was off the charts. It was amazing, and I'm not sure whether that is the point that I was originally intending to make anyway. But I'll make that point because it was quite an incredible experience just to be in a room with 100 and 150 people watching this documentary and listening to them speak afterwards. Quite amazing.
The further you go through life, the more, perhaps, as a generalization, the more evident it becomes. It is, I think it is harder to change your responses to things or the way you do think about things or your behaviors, the further you go through life. Again, I know there will absolutely be people listening who will reject that out of hand at a personal level, which is fine. But yes, I think by and large we are all conditioned by our experiences very early on in life. And I mean, okay, I don't know nearly enough about it, but there are people who speak very clearly about this in so far as what's imprinted on a child's mind or behavior by the age of 7, and it's very, very significant. And I think this goes back to the sort of the white hat thing or coalescing, or what Jason Christoff talks about with the idea that either you do grow up as okay, there are variables here, but the idea that you do grow up as somebody who is looking to be part of a group and needing those sorts of lifelines as you perceive them, or you're not. And I don't think that, broadly speaking, people change in that fundamental sense. And I remember this coming out. Mike and Brian and I went to a pub in Plymouth a couple of months ago, and we were chatting to people, and these stories were being shared about how, because I think there are a number of people there who sort of described that they'd woken up during the COVID thing, and there was a lady there who had I can't forget actually whether she was she was either working in a care home or in a sort of medical setting. I can't remember which it was. I think maybe she was a nurse, and she was talking about how her conscience wouldn't let her continue to do the things they were being asked to do. And I asked her whether she was sort of surprised by that and could she think of other instances in life. And it was something she'd never really examined. And it was very interesting, her response, because she just sort of thought back and thought that actually there were many other instances in which she had effectively expressed the same sorts of behaviour, but of course it hadn't been controversial because it wasn't largely out of kilter with what the people around her were doing or thinking. So I think that who we are is shaped from a very early age, and that does inform the way that we will go on to think about things, even if we're always learning stuff. But I think there is definitely a difference between learning, processing information and then forming points of views or judgments.
A friend of mine made a comment about a year ago. He said to me, human progress, the myth.
I'm going to say I'm not sure whether that's entirely true, because the fact of the matter is that when we live in an environment that's Neolithic times or so on, there's certain things that we need to do to survive that we don't need to do anymore. So what proportion of people actually would know how to do something basic like kill an animal and prepare it for eating and so on? Is that progress? I don't know, but anyway, the point is, I think the problem that humanity exhibits is that we don't recognize the section of humanity which, whether we want to call them sociopaths or psychopaths or whatever, which inevitably ends up at the top of the pyramid. I think that section of humanity certainly doesn't progress, and because they effectively control the purse strings and drive policy and drive societies and so on, we find ourselves unable to get rid of that particular aspect of humanity, and therefore we perhaps, maybe that's holding us back in some ways. I think we progress in some ways and we don't progress in others. I mean, I think it would be equally easy to argue that the fact that many of us don't know how to survive in certain circumstances anymore is a backward step and not a progressive step. But anyway, maybe Charles can say something about that.
I absolutely will, because I take a very literal view of it, and I think, I mean, just imagine, the creator looking down upon the creations and going through, going down the list. Birds, they can still fly pretty much. They're good at, catching the things they need to eat. Fish, still swimming all right. Monkeys, they can still climb trees. Humans, oh no, hang on. No, they can't really run. They can't bend down and pick stuff up. They don't know what to eat. They can't climb stuff. Yeah, so no, I mean, this is a really serious point in my mind. I think at a species level, we have regressed terrifically, and I don't just mean physically. Yes, I do absolutely think that is a very, very serious point. And why? We talk about conditioning when one's younger. I mean, why do we just stop doing the stuff that we should be able to do? Why, when people get to the age of, I don't know, whatever it is, 15, if they've got a mobile telephone, or perhaps 20 if not, they just stop running. They stop swimming, they stop climbing, they stop doing all the sorts of things that keep you active. And I absolutely believe in a healthy mind in a healthy body. And again, mental capacity. The problem is that the physical stuff is easier to sort of articulate, because you can quite clearly see, that person can't do that, or I can't run a mile in whatever. The mental thing is harder to deal with, because you don't know what your mental capacity could be, because it's not possible to regard that. But I think we absolutely have failed. When you think of the way in which people could recite enormous volumes of poetry or song or whatever, we cannot do that now. So I don't regard it as progress that we've basically outsourced all of our capabilities. I regard that as a massive vulnerability. Look where we are now. We talk the entire time about the system being shut down, no money, no food, no whatever. But the vast majority of people are totally stuck because they cannot rely upon themselves or the small groups of humans that they engage or operate with in order to achieve that. So I know it sounds sort of basic and simplistic, but I think it should be basic and simplistic. And I think we are absolute fools to imagine that we can sort of tech our way out of it. We can't. And I'm afraid to say, I do take a really hard line on this. I think that it is an absolute abuse of the incredible sort of privilege of life to squander that by not absolutely making the best of all the capabilities that we have. One of our dogs was barking in the night, and I couldn't quite think what was going on, and only to find that there was a huge confection of feathers on the lawn this morning. Evidently, there was a fox around the house. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't sense it, but one of the dogs could. So, yeah, we have lost ground, and we need to regain it. It's not all doom and gloom. I'm reading an excellent book about Crete during the Second World War at the minute, and the incredible feats of sort of endurance and everything else by the Cretans, and I dare say that persists to an extent to this day. Anyway, I know we've got to wrap it up, but yeah, we have not progressed in many respects. We need to reclaim that ground.
Thank you for this week's banter. I'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Jerm.